Welcome to Manga's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 16, The Half-Elf Godkin. The theocracy's assault turned fiercer, finally breaking through the capital's outer defenses. Seeing that the theocracy's soldiers had begun entering the city, Ainz and his party started to move quickly. The first thing Ainz did after infiltrating the castle under perfect, unknowable, was to find an elf who was alone with no witnesses around and capture them. After passing up multiple opportunities because of the possibility of being discovered, he finally captured a female elf who looked like a servant. Ainz immediately charmed her and returned to the twins' location using gate. Then, he questioned her just like they did with the elf before. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get much useful information out of the woman. Realizing there was no more useful information to be gained from the elf, Ainz immediately killed her with death without hesitation. There shouldn't be any problem with a single woman disappearing from a castle that was going to fall soon. After divesting the elf of her clothes and other things that could be used to identify her, they moved her body to a faraway place the place they initially discovered the Overlord using gate. The wild animals would probably pick her clean. Even if she was discovered before that, she would just be a mysterious corpse without a single wound. It's very unlikely that someone would connect it with Ainz and the others. He thought it would be more natural to teleport her above the castle and have her die from the fall, as it would have been a reasonable action for her in this situation. However, given that they might need to use her identity later, he just made her disappear. Some MP exhaustion was necessary to deal with the body, but with Ainz's MP recovery rate in mind, it was not a big deal. Plus, even if he wanted to wait until it recovered, they didn't have any time left to observe things from the sidelines anymore. The theocracy's forces were still having a hard time against the elves' guerrilla warfare in the city. That said, considering the difference in their fighting strength, their victory was just a matter of time. No strong individual had appeared on the field yet, so it was probably correct of them to think that there was no one like that present here. The Elf King, who was said to be a strong person, was nowhere to be found on the defending side, probably because he had already escaped from this place. In that case, the magic items would have followed him, rendering their actions here into a meaningless endeavor. Ainz muttered such thoughts internally and then called out to the twins. Well, let's move. They now knew the general position of their destination, but it was unfortunate that they didn't manage to find out the abilities and items of the king, who was known as the strongest individual in this kingdom. Maybe they should have chosen a more important-looking elf, but there wasn't enough time to carefully select their target. There's only one problem left. How should we know, to be more accurate, who should be the one to conceal themselves? In this hostile territory, each of them moving independently was out of the question. They had acted out of sight up to this point, so moving brazenly in the open now would render all those efforts meaningless. It would then be best if all three of them moved in stealth. They certainly had the means to do that, but it also created a new problem. Aura was the only one who could sense Ainz in perfect unknowable, and even then, she could only sense that he was somewhere around them. Druids have a spell to see through perfect unknowable, but Mare, who mostly specialized in the use of offensive spells barring a few exceptions, didn't have that particular one. If Aura went into stealth with her Gilly cloak, even Ainz and Mare couldn't find her. The sunlight dapple cloak that Mare usually equipped had extremely high stealth capabilities outdoors, especially in the forests, but its ability would be reduced to half while indoors. Unfortunately, it seemed like this place was considered indoors, even though the castle was made out of trees, reducing the cloak's ability to the point where even Ainz could sense him more or less. If both Aura and Ainz could sense Mare's location, it was highly likely that the enemy could as well, so it would be meaningless. This meant, if Ainz hid, Aura could find him, but Mare couldn't. If Aura hid, both Ainz and Mare couldn't find her. Mare's sunlight dapple cloak was weakened, and even if he used the Gilly cloak, the results should be about the same. It's highly possible that a third party could discover him as well. They finally concluded that if the three of them could not move covertly together, one of them should hide to act as their trump card in an emergency. While Aura was the most appropriate one for the role, it would be troublesome if Mare and Ainz couldn't grasp her location in a pinch. If they were too unlucky, they might even end up crashing into her while trying to move. This is really a large mistake on my part. They had a week of time to prepare. They absolutely should have discussed this before coming here. Ainz went through such stealth operations many times in Yggdrasil. For example, during Nazarik's first clear, they had to secretly travel through the Tuvig-filled swamps. But all of his guildmates generally prepared their own measures for stealth operations. As everyone was generally used to it, a little talk before taking action worked well enough for them, even if they didn't discuss it before. Ainz got a little excited at the word kill steal, because it made him remember things from Yggdrasil, so he completely forgot about discussing the plan with the twins. Then why didn't the other two point it out to him? He didn't confirm if his hunch was true, since that would be scary for him, but they were probably thinking that Ainz Sama probably has some plans with full trust in him. Actually, their eyes were gazing upon him with absolute faith right at this moment. He couldn't tell them that he had no plans right now. He spun his non-existent brain matter at full speed enough to heat his also imaginary brains. Ainz could instead ask them about what they should do right now, but they couldn't waste time here, so he should propose his idea first. Then I will use perfect unknowable, or it will be the vanguard. Ainz decided. The twins would not hide. They would just have to rely on Aura's senses to avoid others. If something unexpected were to happen, the twins would face them openly, with Ainz ready to support them at any moment. He was more worried about them becoming separated during an attack than he was about them being discovered by someone, because they wouldn't be able to find each other in the first case. The twins raised no objections. Is it really fine? You can speak your mind if you notice something you know. Honestly, Ainz would be happier if they had any objections. 3 heads together instead of using Ainz's alone would probably think up a better plan. There was also the possibility that the twins agreed just because it was Ainz's plan. Strictly speaking, they were throwing the responsibility onto him. If Ainz overlooked something or his plans failed, which was a common enough occurrence, what were they going to do? They probably wouldn't say anything, even if things went awry, but that was most definitely not a good thing. That's the problem with the NPCs. But even if I force them to squeeze out some ideas here, there isn't enough time. Let's just ignore this problem for now and be more cautious the next time around. He explained various countermeasures to Aura and Mare, and then walked after them into the castle with his spell active. There were barely any elves, just like when Ainz infiltrated alone before, so they didn't meet anyone on the way. Of course, the fact that Aura was listening to the footsteps around them and timing their movements so that they would avoid them was also a major factor in this situation. There were barely any people in the kingdom's royal castle during its last moments as well, but they worked to create barricades at the entrances at least. There were no such things here, even though the theocracy was on their doorsteps. In fact, the mood here felt like nothing unusual was happening outside at all. It doesn't feel like they intend to defend it. As I expected, did the country's upper echelons leave the city to its own devices and escape already? From what I've heard, there doesn't seem to be any other elven countries around here, but the Great Sea of Trees is rather huge. It's entirely possible that there are lands further south with cities, and we just don't know about them. All this trouble would be for nothing if that's the case. Anyhow, they would have an answer soon. It would be dumb of him to continue thinking about matters they could do nothing about. The restricted area, likely the treasury, seemed to be on the upper floors. It was 2 floors above the one where the king's personal room was, and it was the highest point in the castle. He initially thought about entering it from the outside, but abandoned the idea when he considered that it was unlikely that such a place had windows. And so the 3 of them continued to advance up the stairs. They climbed the floors without getting discovered. Upon reaching the floor of their destination, Aura raised her voice with a hint of suspicion. What is this place even? The entire ceiling, which was about 15 meters high, was filled with lights, covering all of its surfaces. There weren't any windows around, so there was no doubt that it was done through some kind of magic. But it wasn't bright enough to be called dazzling. Ainz moved his body a little to try and see if he received any debuffs. It would appear that this was not the kind of light the priests would use that negatively affected the undead. Considering that this was the elven country, it was probably some divine magic related to the druids. The phenomenon itself wasn't that weird. After all, Nazaryk's 6th floor was similar. Even arcane magic and psychic magic had light-emitting spells after all. But the lack of secondary effects made it hard to know which type of magic this light belonged to. But that was not what made Aura raise her voice. It was the thing directly opposite the ceiling, the floor, which was completely covered with soil. Most of the floor, free of any walls or partitions and about 100 meters wide in every direction, was covered by soil. There were some areas free of the soil coverage, but the area around the huge door further in was completely covered. Aura lightly kicked the soil a few times and turned some over. It didn't take that long before she hit the floor beneath it. It wasn't that deep. A substitute for a carpet, maybe. Hearing that, Ainz felt like that was probably the case. The Dark Elf village didn't have a culture of using carpets either. They at most used some floor cushions weaved from grass. Wait, no, culture is a diverse topic, but doesn't this feel a bit primitive? Or is this a measure of caution? To make intruders leave their footprints? But in that case, shouldn't there be a patrol or guard watching this area? Ainz concurred with Mare's words. There didn't seem to be anyone around here. Too careless to think no one's here. No, maybe even the ones who were here were mobilized to defend against the theocracy's assault. That servant said this area was restricted, though nothing about soldiers being stationed here. Now maybe they plan to cultivate vegetables and stuff if they ever need to hole up in the castle. Or raise an awe in agreement with Mayor's hypothesis. Ainz agreed as well. It was possible for druids to cultivate crops here, even though there wasn't any sunlight coming in. Maybe this light substituted for real sunlight to grow plants here. Though the area Aura kicked over was shallow, it was near the edge. It was possible that the soil further in was deep enough to grow plants. I can test this better if someone like Shaltir, who receives a penalty from sunlight, was with us here. I could use all appraisal magic item if it's a magic item, but if they didn't find anything good in the treasury, they can try taking this along with them as a consolation. Ainz settled on that decision and started walking after the twins. Those two used skills to not leave any footprints behind, while Ainz cast Fly well, maintaining perfect unknowable to do the same. As the group neared the center of the room, I felt some strange presence and came over to check, but to think it was some dark elves. Twin kids at that. A voice suddenly spoke.